All right, in this video, I'm going to show you the anatomy of a muscle and what it's made out of. We're going to start with the small pieces. So the protein that is inside of muscle cells can be considered thick filaments or thin filaments. Even these thin filaments are technically made of multiple proteins, but we're going to simplify for the sake being here. So we have thick, and thin. And when you bundle a bunch of these thick and thin filaments together, you make what's called a myofibril, like a big fiber made of muscle filaments. And here's another myofibril. And here's another myofibril and another myofibril. And surrounding all the myofibrils is what's called the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which I'm representing with filter paper. And it kind of course, it would be much longer than this in reality to cover the whole length of the muscle and the myofibrils. But it's kind of just wrapped around like so. And so it contains all the myofibrils. So still all of this is considered inside of a single muscle cell. These are the proteins wrapped into bundles called myofibrils that are then wrapped and surrounded by sarcoplasmic reticulum. And I'm going to throw in a couple nuclei into my model here because muscle cells are multinucleated because they're formed from the fusion of multiple cells. And now I'm going to wrap this in cell membrane. I'm going to use this saran wrap to represent the cell membrane of a muscle cell, which is also called the sarcolemma. You're going to hear sarco a lot here. So all of these myofibrils are in there, the nuclei of the cell, of course, and then all wrapped up into the sarcolemma. So here you have a single muscle cell, also known as a muscle fiber because it's so long. And over here you see a bunch of muscle cells that are all being innervated by a nerve. And so this would be a motor neuron because it's speaking to muscle cells, and this would go all the way up to the brain. But then the neuron, the axon of the neuron would branch and communicate to all three of these muscle cells, which would make this one motor unit. Okay, I've added two things. The first thing is a capillary or blood vessel that's going to nourish the muscle cell. And then there is a very thin layer of connective tissue around each individual muscle cell that's called the endomysium because it's within. Now, a collection of muscle cells or muscle fibers bundled up together is called a fascicle. And a fascicle is wrapped in another connective tissue membrane to contain all of it, called the perimysium, because it's around all of the bundles of fascicles, or fascicles. Now, an entire muscle is made up of a bunch of these fascicles, all wrapped together in yet another connective tissue layer that is finally called the epimysium. And that would give you a muscle. Now, I only have two in here because I don't want to spend all day wrapping noodles. So let's do this again in reverse. We have our epimysium connective tissue layer that is surrounding all of the fascicles. Okay, and with around each fascicle is a layer of connective tissue called the perimysium that's really difficult to get off. Within one of the fascicles is a collection of individual muscle fibers like this, which are wrapped in endomysium. And lastly, you have your sarcolemma, which is your cell membrane of your muscle fiber. You have your nerve, you have your blood vessel. Inside the cell membrane, you have thick and thin filaments. Actually, you have bundles of thick and thin filaments called myofibrils. And you have the nuclei right there. And you have the paper, which is representing the sarcoplasmic reticulum.